In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, September 15th. North Korea's Kim Jong-un remains in Russia and tours a plant for fighter jets and a shipyard of battleships on this Friday, while South Korea and the U.S. warn against an arms deal between Pyongyang and Moscow. Meanwhile, the country's inflation prospects appear murky amid the presence of external factors, including rising oil prices, but quite a number of pundits believe the pace of consumer price hikes will slow in the course of the year. And over in Libya, the African country's death toll continues to escalate, surging past 11,000 as the coastal city of Derna bears the brunt of the heavy downpours. We start in Russia, where North Korea's Kim Jong-un takes a tour of a production plant for Moscow's fighter jets early this morning, as the South Korean and U.S. administrations renew their warning against a potential weapons deal between Russia and North Korea. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Arirang reports.
A private train that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been using arrived in the city of Khabarovsk at around 8:50 a.m. on Friday. That's according to Russia's TASS news agency. Kim reportedly looked around a high-tech aircraft production plant in Khabarovsk, which mainly produces the Sukhoi Su-57 high-tech multi-purpose fighter jet as well as private jets. It seems that the North Korean leader will also visit a local shipyard to look at attack submarines and warship building facilities. His last stop in Russia is expected to be Vladivostok. There he will likely tour the Russian Pacific Fleet, where he might actually go on a warship and watch a military exercise. Kim will then head back to North Korea. The U.S. Department of Defense meanwhile said that the South Korea-U.S. joint military drills won't be affected by the possible North Korea-Russia military exercises. Asked about the intention of potential Pyongyang-Moscow drills, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said on Thursday that although the intention is unknown, it cannot stop any military ties between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. She also warned North Korea of supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Providing any type of arms to Russia would again violate the UN Security Council resolutions that Russia itself voted for. So we would encourage that North Korea, not pursue a deal with Russia.
The South Korean government also said that any actions by North Korea and Russia that violate UN Security Council resolutions and threaten South Korea's security will come at a clear cost. The National Security Council committee members on Thursday called on Moscow and Pyongyang to not get involved in an arms trade. Kim and Putin could possibly meet again soon, as the Kremlin on Thursday said that the Russian leader accepted Kim's invitation to visit the North with pleasure. The Kremlin spokesperson added that every bilateral agreement will be made through diplomatic channels. It also said that the two leaders exchanged rifles during their summit on Wednesday. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
And the Biden administration has shared a fresh and far-reaching sanctions list that includes institutions and individuals in countries like Turkey and Georgia alleged to be assisting Russia in its aggression against Ukraine. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
In what is one of the largest sanctions packages announced by the U.S. State and Treasury Departments, Washington on Thursday issued a fresh round of sanctions against over 150 entities involved with helping Russia evade sanctions and supporting Moscow in its war against Ukraine. Those involved with helping Russia include businesses and people in Turkey, Georgia, the UAE, Russia, and more. According to Reuters, the latest designations target shipping and trade companies involved in helping repair sanctioned vessels linked to Russia's defense ministry, while also helping with the transfer of dual-use goods, items which have both civilian and military application. It also targets those that sell Western technology to Moscow that could be used to fuel its war in Ukraine. However, watchers have raised concerns over the fact that some of the entities targeted in Washington's latest sanctions package are from Turkey. The U.S. imposed sanctions on 5 Turkish companies and 1 Turkish national linked with helping Russia evade sanctions and supporting Moscow in its war in Ukraine. However, the U.S. State Department says it's not worried that measures taken against Turkish firms will derail Sweden's NATO bid.
We have a constructive, warm relationship with the Turkish government. They are an important ally of ours, and we don't see that in any way these sanctions should have any impact at all on that accession.
Also, among those sanctioned by the U.S. on Thursday is Russia's largest vehicle manufacturer, AutoVAZ, and a major local copper producer, the Russian Copper Company. 이승재, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here in capital Seoul, officials from the Yoon and Biden administrations are meeting today to address defense and diplomatic matters under the framework of the extended deterrence strategy and consultation group amid escalating security threats posed by North Korea. Seoul's first Vice Foreign Minister Chang Ho-jin and Vice Defense Minister Shin Bum-chul are sitting down with their U.S. counterparts under Secretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Bonnie Jenkins and Acting Under Secretary of Defense for Policy Sasha Baker, respectively. In other news, President Yoon Suk-yeol will be in New York for the UN General Assembly next week that is, and on his agenda is a final pitch to his counterparts for Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is looking to strengthen South Korea's status as a globally contributing country while making his biggest push yet for Busan's bid to host the World Expo in 2030. On Wednesday, the presidential office announced that President Yoon will be in New York from Monday to Friday.
During this general meeting, the President will launch an all-out diplomatic campaign to get support for Busan's bid to host the World Expo in 2030. At the moment, around 30 meetings with other leaders are scheduled, with more in the works. This is something that no other South Korean president has attempted during overseas trips.
As soon as he lands in New York, President Yoon will start his series of bilateral meetings with the leaders of Turkmenistan and the Czech Republic, among others. On the second day, he will meet with his Ghanaian counterpart as well as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. A number of bilateral sideline meetings will happen in between, including with 10 countries that South Korea never has met before one-on-one, such as San Marino and St. Lucia. The third day will be when Yoon speaks to the UN General Assembly.
President Yoon will promise to the world continued enhancement of official development assistance to close the global development gaps, support to reduce carbon emissions and the transition to clean energy in climate-vulnerable countries, and for South Korea to be responsible for the world enjoying the benefits of digital technology.
Kim also explained that Yoon will have the opportunity to share South Korea's vision as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for 2 years starting in 2024. On Thursday, he will be returning to New York University's Digital Vision Forum, as last year he was there to emphasize the importance of digital technologies in contributing to the expansion of freedom. He is expected to re-emphasize South Korea's taking the lead in creating regulations for fair and equitable access to digital assets. On his last day, he will wrap up his stay in New York with meetings with the leaders of the Pacific Islands. While the top office's focus may be on winning votes at BIE for Busan's bid to host World Expo 2030, it does come with the backdrop of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visiting Russia's Vladimir Putin, with the two strengthening military cooperation. An official says the public can expect an appropriate analysis and message for the two in Yoon's speech to the UN General Assembly. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The UNESCO World Heritage Committee has urged Tokyo to abide by its commitment to disclosing the history of Hashima Island in Japan, where the forced labor of Korean people and others took place from the early to mid-1900s. At its 45th session on Thursday in Riyadh, the committee adopted a decision by consensus calling on Tokyo to continue dialogue with concerned states and conduct further research to enhance, quote, the interpretation strategy of the site. Now, this interpretation strategy refers to the promises made by Japan in 2015 to share with the world the history of Hashima Island upon its approval as a heritage site. Japan has since been denounced for whitewashing the history of the coal mining island known as Gunhamdo in Korean. Seoul's foreign ministry, for its part, voiced hopes for Tokyo to report on its related progress by next December, as requested by UNESCO. In Libya, the death toll from flooding there has surged past 11,000 as the coastal city of Derna bears the brunt of the brutal rain-related repercussions. Our Choi Soo-young has the latest.
The death toll from floods in the Libyan city of Derna has soared to 11,300. That's according to the Libyan Red Crescent on Thursday. Rescue efforts are ongoing following the catastrophic dam collapse on September 10th following heavy rain. The number of confirmed deaths is increasing rapidly, and the final death toll could potentially reach up to 20,000 people. Thousands of dead bodies have been buried in mass graves. Scientists say the latest extreme weather event, Storm Daniel, the Mediterranean storm that poured torrential rain on the Libyan coast, shows some of the hallmarks of climate change.
The Libyan situation is obviously catastrophic and a very difficult situation. And with all these events, it's always complicated. The ultimate trigger for it is an extreme storm in the Mediterranean that many are linking to global warming.
Since 2014, Libya has been divided into two rival governments. The government of national unity in the west is recognized by the United Nations, while the Libyan National Army under the military leadership controls the east, where the coastal city of Derna is located. According to BBC reports, these opposing governments, after a long conflict, are now seeking cooperation for humanitarian relief. Libya's Eastern administration approved an emergency budget of 10 billion Libyan dinars, nearly $2 billion on Thursday, to help flood-affected areas.
Today we met regarding the emergency budget for the purpose of voting on it and for the purpose of determining the mechanisms for its distribution and to ensure that the budget will achieve what is required of it or will achieve the purpose of its allocation, which is to help the population rebuild and repair roads and bridges.
Meanwhile, in response, the World Health Organization announced that it would give $2 million from its emergency fund to help the flood victims. The WHO also sent extra emergency supplies and medical supplies from its logistics hub in Dubai. The United Nations, EU, and countries like the UK, Tunisia, and Jordan are among those who have also joined the aid effort. Derna, a small city of around 125,000 people, might have lost 1 in 6 residents if the estimated disaster numbers are accurate. Cho Hyung, Arirang News.
Korea's inflation prospects are looking quite murky amid the presence of external factors, including rising oil prices. But quite a number of pundits believe the pace of consumer price hikes will slow. Our An Sung-jin reports.
Despite a relative slowdown this year, consumer prices in South Korea remain unstable amid continuing external uncertainties. According to economics think tank the Korea Development Institute on Friday, consumer prices in August saw an on-year increase of 3.4%. This indicates improvement from January of this year when the on-year increase was 5.2%. Though the inflation rate has been dropping on a monthly comparison, the rise in prices for energy and agricultural products has pushed last month's figure back up from 2.3% in July. Weather conditions such as heat waves and heavy rain largely attributed to the 2.7% on-year increase for agricultural products, particularly the increased cost of vegetables. Oil prices rose as Russia and Saudi Arabia extended their oil production cuts to the end of this year, while expectations that there will be no further interest rate hikes in the U.S. through the end of 2023 also attributed to climbing oil prices. These factors took their toll on domestic oil prices, which jumped 11% on year. Prices for basic necessities including vegetables, processed food, and petroleum products were also affected, increasing 3.9% on year. Despite global volatile factors that affect consumer prices, the inflation increases are expected to further slow down as improvement in consumer sentiment and semiconductor exports provide some optimism. At a government meeting on Friday, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho emphasized that since core inflation, which excludes these volatile components, is rather stable, the overall inflation for October is set to stabilize. However, he also added that as concerns over soaring oil prices remain, caution is necessary. The government may also extend fuel tax cuts if prices remain high. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And as my colleague An Sung-jin just mentioned, oil prices rose to their highest levels this year on Thursday on the back of supply concerns amid extended production cuts by Saudi Arabia and Russia. Now, Brent crude and U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude soared past the $90 mark, hitting highs unseen since last November. The latest surge follows an International Energy Agency report back on Wednesday, forecasting a market deficit until the end of this year amid output cuts by Saudi Arabia and Russia. Health authorities here have issued an influenza alert starting Friday amid this year's unusually long flu season. According to the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, the number of flu cases hit 11.3 per 1,000 people in the first week of September. Now, this is nearly double the expected average for the period. Accordingly, the national influenza vaccination program will begin on September 20th for children who require 2 doses, followed by other children and pregnant women on October 5th. Elderly people can receive their shots from October 11th. A record low national fertility rate is not a problem for Hwacheon County in Gangwon-do Province, where the rate itself appears to be on the rise. Our Lee Soo-jin was there.
Baby whales and classroom chatter might soon be a thing of the past. This elementary school is just one of many in South Korea that have been abandoned and shut down due to the lack of students. And this comes as South Korea's fertility rate continues to shatter records. The nation's total fertility rate, the average number of children expected per woman, tumbled to a record low of 0.78 last year. As of 2021, South Korea is the only OECD member country where the total fertility rate is less than 1. And this year's fertility rate for the second quarter fell further to 0.7. We asked young South Koreans why they're hesitant to have children.
If I get married, both me and my husband will probably have to work because of the high education costs. But if there's no childcare center that I can trust, it might be better to just not have children.
The reality is that raising a kid is costly because of the high education costs.
But there are still areas in South Korea where fertility rates have actually gone up. This county in Gangwon-do Province has a fertility rate that greatly exceeds the national average. Let's go find out how it has achieved this. We met with the mayor of Hwacheon County, who told us that this was largely due to a decade-long effort to provide a comprehensive support system with a focus on alleviating the education cost burden.
We wanted to provide equal opportunities for people regardless of their economic background, from the time the baby is in their mother's womb until the child graduates college.
The county pays college tuitions of not only students attending domestic colleges, but also any of the world's top 100 universities, as long as they have parents who have lived in Hwacheon for at least 3 years. While the nation's fertility rate has been on a steady decline since 2015, Hwacheon's fertility rate actually rose from 1.2 in 2021 to 1.4 last year. During this period, a new public postpartum rest center opened. Postpartum rest centers are clinics unique to Korean culture that help mothers recuperate after giving birth. Women typically stay at these centers for 2 weeks where staff care for newborns while the mothers rest. They can cost up to around $12,000.
Anyone who's lived in Hwacheon for at least a year can use the center for 2 weeks at no cost. I've lived here for 3 years, so I'm staying here for free.
There are also programs aimed at helping them transition into motherhood smoothly.
The programs that teach us practical skills such as how to bathe a newborn and breastfeed properly have been super helpful.
The county also offers services where elementary school students can hail a bus through a smartphone app.
주로 오는데 얼마 정도 걸려요?
2분.
The bus stops at various locations and parents receive text messages that inform them of their child's location. The importance of coming up with a comprehensive solution like this was echoed by one expert.
The government has already implemented various policies, including financial incentives for having children, improving work-life balance, and expanding childcare services. Yet to be effective, policies must take a comprehensive approach.
She added that there also needs to be more measures aimed at providing affordable housing and stable jobs, as well as creating a cultural shift away from the traditional nuclear family structure. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. On the small Italian island of Lampedusa, over 7,000 migrants and refugees have arrived in just 2 days. The volume of people has exceeded the island's own population of 6,000, and its local reception center is being overwhelmed. Many of the migrants, including children, have been forced to sleep outside. In response, authorities are moving thousands of migrants to Sicily, which has bigger processing facilities. Lampedusa is Italy's southernmost island and is known as a hotspot for migrants looking to cross into Europe from North Africa. The journey is perilous, with many crossing the Mediterranean Sea in flimsy wooden boats. According to the UN Migration Agency, so far this year, at least 2,000 people have died attempting to reach Italy and Malta. In the United States, President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has been indicted on 3 federal gun charges. All 3 charges on Thursday relate to allegations that Hunter lied on forms while buying a handgun at a time when he was a drug user. In July, Hunter was set to have the charges against him dropped for pleading guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes and illegally possessing a gun while a drug user. But his plea deal with prosecutors was rejected by a judge, citing concern over the agreement's structure and the scale of its immunity. The president's son is a former lawyer and was discharged from the U.S. Navy in 2014 after testing positive for cocaine. He is also facing an investigation into his business dealings and allegations of tax evasion. And finally, models with disabilities took center stage at New York Fashion Week. Over 70 models took to the catwalk on Wednesday and showcased a range of adaptive clothing specifically designed to give those with disabilities access to fashion. The show was organized by non-profit The Runway of Dreams Foundation, which works with fashion retailers to adapt their clothing to the needs of all consumers. Brands represented at the show included Adidas, Thomas Hilfiger, and Victoria's Secret. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It has been a very rainy and gloomy week with more wet conditions expected through the weekend. Today's rain will mainly come down in central parts of the country. The capital area and parts of Gangwon-do province will see 10 to 60 millimeters of showers. The rest of the country could see 20 to 80 millimeters into Saturday. Southern regions will see rain tapering off and taking a break from this afternoon into tomorrow. So those of you in the southern parts of the country should have highs that are 3 to 4 degrees higher, but breezier in central regions with that rain expected all day today. Seoul and Chuncheon will be topping out at 25 degrees Celsius this afternoon, Daejeon at 24. Meanwhile, Jeju Island will be rain-free today, but rain starts on Jeju tomorrow, and it will rain through next Monday, so please keep an umbrella handy until then. A rainy weekend ahead, and next week looks to be as rainy and cloudy as this week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends this edition of the Daily Report. We return with yet another edition of Issues and Insiders in a few minutes. Do stay with us.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Deal. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
K-animation, loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. K-animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-animation, befriending children all over the world.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. Are you excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
Cadastre is a register of property showing the extent, value and ownership of land for taxation, and cadastral systems are the methods used to define them. So why is Colombia interested in Korea's cadastral system? What is the importance of cadastral systems for developing countries? And how can countries work to promote productive partnership amid the current climate of conflict?
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we explore Korea's efforts to expand its official development assistance to its partners overseas. For more on this, I have Ambassador Alejandro Pelaez from Colombia here in the studio. Ambassador Pelaez, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I also have Director General Oh Sang-ik from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport with us. Mr. Oh, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you so much then. Mr. Oh, we'll start with you. Let's begin then with a few details about Korea's transfer of its cadastral system to Colombia.
Yeah, since Colombian President Gustavo Petros inaugurated in August 2022, the Colombian government has made efforts to reform rural area, including land reform initiatives. The reason why the Colombian president placed top priority on this is that land reform is the first prerequisite of total peace in Colombia. An essential part of the land reform is multi-purpose cadastral system, where the information on property boundaries and price is comprehensively managed in the system. So Korea has been regarded as a country with a well-established land information system. So that's why Colombia turned to Korea to seek help for this land reform. During the knowledge sharing program last July, we discussed with Ambassador these matters related to system transfer and ODA.
Right, I see. And before we advance any further, Ambassador Pelaez, perhaps you could tell us a bit about Colombia's interest in Korea's cadastral system, because cadastral systems across the world differ, I understand.
Yes. Well, basically, our interest is based upon three pillars. The first one is obviously President Petro knows very well Korean history. He knows that a milestone in this economic development started with the rural reform, and also it's very important to have this. The rural reform in Colombia has many questions, many people who is also against it. So basically, to say, look, how Korea, a country that was in the worst conditions in the 50s, and now is 6 times bigger in terms of economic growth, makes a clearer explanation. So that's one side. The other side is technology. A good rural reform requires top technology, and we are very sure, Colombia is very sure, that Korea has that technology that is going to allow us to do a rural reform guaranteeing equality, okay? And the fifth one is related with management. Land management is important. Correct management gives resources to small towns. So that is very important because in Colombia, cities has, some parts of the city has very good incomes, others no, but small cities is where you see a gap, a clear gap between the citizens that live in the small cities and the big cities. So those are the 3 pillars that President Petro wants to solve using the Korean technology and doing the cadastry with the Korean technology.
Right, I see. And this transfer of cadastral system from Korea to Colombia, Mr. O, I believe comes under the Yoon administration's broader plan to expand its official development assistance to its overseas partners. First, for the sake of lay people out there who are watching our program, could you tell us a bit more about what the official development assistance is and what is the administration's plan in that regard?
Yeah, as you may know, the ODA is government aid that promotes economic development and welfare of developing countries. Normally, the ODA consists of grant and concession loan, depending on whether or not the recipient country has an obligation to repayment. According to OECD data, the total amount of global ODA is reached $185.9 billion in 2021. Among them, Korea's ODA accounts for $2.8 billion. Since Korea's entrance to Development Assistance Committee, DAC, we call it DAC, in 2010, Korea's ODA has been exponentially increasing to reach the level of advanced donor countries. So even when pursuing austerity in our fiscal policy, the Korean government is continuing to increase the size of ODA in order to help address complex global challenges such as healthcare crisis, digital transition, green transition, and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. According to government draft budget plan, Korea's ODA would increase by 47% next year. And recently at the G20 summit, as you know, at the G20 summit, which took place in New Delhi, President Yoon announced that Korea will provide $2.3 billion to Ukraine and $300 million to the GCF. For your information, I know that you lived in Kenya during your childhood, and Korea's ODA to Kenya is $35 million last year.
Right, I see. Good to know.
It's mainly for education and humanitarian aid.
Right, which are some of the plans that the Yoon administration has for the African continent as well, right?
Yes.
Mr. O, with regard to cadastral systems then, what would you say is the importance of cadastral systems for developing countries?
Before answering about that, I have to say infrastructure construction is important for economic recovery of developing countries, especially in this time of post-pandemic era. This is why the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport has more role in the ODA and international cooperation. The size of ODA under my ministry, MOLIT, is $2 million last year, and which consists of projects on transport, urban development, and geospatial information. In fact, Colombia is MOLIT's second biggest ODA partner. And the field of geospatial information plays an important part in our ODA for digital transformation. We are implementing a cadastral system in Ethiopia with the EDCF, and we built a geospatial information education center in Tanzania. Also recently, I visited the World Bank headquarters in DC and proposed a joint research project on the socio-economic impacts of climate change and policy recommendations using the concept of Korea's cadastral resurvey.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Ambassador Pralay, earlier on you spoke about Colombia's interest, or the government's interest, of course, in Korea's transformation from a war-torn country to an economic powerhouse. That being said, what other aspects of Korea's development history is of interest to Colombia, do you think?
Yes. We are following Korea's example, selecting sectors, for instance, to develop the country. At this moment, Colombia has 15 FTA agreements. Korea is included. But if you see those free trade agreements, the exports in most of them hasn't increased that much. So the conclusion is that the country needs a reindustrialization, and we are, once again, following Korea example, selecting sectors where we can reindustrialize the country and start to increase the value added in our exports, and start to have much more participation on exports in our GDP, as Korea did in its history. So that's one thing. We selected 5 sectors. 4 of them are related with goods, and the other one is services. The first 4 are agricultural. The second one is healthcare. Third one is what is related with the military forces and defense. And the fourth one is energy transition. The fifth one, that is services, is related with infrastructure, because what we need is to have a competitive infrastructure in terms to also have to export these goods to different markets, and once again take advantage of the free trade agreements we have developed. The second part is education. We want to have establish a strong, better relationship with Korea in terms of education, particularly on the IT sector, as well as in the agricultural sector. So it's something that during my tenure I'm going to work very hard in order to strengthen ties with Korea with education. So
right,
basically those are the
right. And on a lighter note, Ambassador Pralay, what do you suppose has been the impact of Korean entertainment, like its music, its movies, on Colombians' perception of the country, Korea itself?
That's a wonderful question, let me tell you. Today, many youngsters in Colombia, I would say that they have the Korean dream. Not the American dream, but the Korean dream. Many of them are very well aware about K-pop groups, K-dramas as well. So the Korean culture is closer than 20 or 30 years before. So no doubt that is going to affect positively in terms, for instance, once again in education. Now we are seeing Colombians are very interested to have scholarships in Korean universities. Definitely, when you have this kind of a strategy, you have good results, and Korea is doing very well its job.
Right, I see, and I'm sure it's very flattered to hear you say that. Mr. O, what more can you tell us about foreign interest in Korea's miracle on the Han River, so to speak, and what is being done by the government to better share this know-how?
Yeah, very important question. And the essence of ODA lies in institution building, capacity building, and infrastructure building. Through knowledge sharing and transfers, our experience and know-how can be shared with partner countries. In knowledge sharing program, participants from developing countries often say that they want to know more about Korea's economic development. For example, for the land reform, Colombia wanted to know how much money the government paid to acquire land and method of payment. When the recent administration implemented land reform, the government estimated the land price as 1.5 times of annual production of the land. So in light of this, there is a need for us to make the information on Korea's experience more accessible for foreign countries. And one important way to do so is promote translation related to Korea's economic development, at least into English. I wrote a book, Overseas Energy Investment, Korea and Japan, and to share detailed history of Korea's energy security policies. And I plan to visit the U.S. next week to share the knowledge, and I visit U.S. institutes in the U.S. such as Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, CSIS, and Korea Economic Institute. During the seminars, I would like to share not only Korea's policies, but also blood, toil, tears, and sweat Korean people have offered in history.
Right, like BTS is offering right now.
Yeah, right.
Mr. O, before I turn back to Ambassador Pelaez, could you tell us a bit more about the government's plan to double, I understand, its humanitarian ODA?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Korean government has increased its humanitarian aid in order to illuminate Korea's role as a pivotal member of international community. When the earthquake hit Turkey, Korea provided Turkey with financial support and dispatched Korea Disaster Relief Team, KDRT. Also, my ministry provided satellite images to help rescue mission. Now there is a pressing need for us to pay attention to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. For Ukraine, we are implementing HDP Nexus approach, which means a set of procedures from humanitarian aid and developmental support, ultimately achieving peace. Overcoming economic difficulties also requires reconstruction activities, and I expect that Korean contractors who are highly capable will contribute for the infrastructure building and job creation in Ukraine.
Right, and talking about such economic plans, Ambassador Pelaez, what can you tell us about Colombia's broader plan with regard to economic growth?
Yes. At this moment, Colombia is trying to position itself as a nearshoring destination. If you see, at this moment, Korea is looking for to be near its markets, but looking for also cost competitiveness. We've seen that we have this possibility to position ourselves as a nearshoring destination in 4 different sectors, which are also related with the sectors I mentioned before: healthcare, agricultural, agribusiness, energy, and defense. That's one strategy. So we are, along with the National Agency of Promotion of Investment, Exports and Tourism, doing different events. For instance, this week we participated in H2 Meet, and we signed an MOU in order to attract investments in hydrogen technology to Colombia and to build partnerships with Korean companies. Also, the strategy is, or has another point that is very interesting and very important, that is IT. The IT sector, and put in contact the two ecosystems of innovations is important. At this moment, in this moment, what we are seeing is that open innovation is important for both countries. Find solutions to different problems, maybe 15 kilometers away, as we are between Korea and Colombia. Is something that has already been done along with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, and surely is going to do. We are going to have another examples to show that both ecosystems has technology and competitiveness.
Right, and Ambassador Pelaez, very simply speaking then, what merits does Colombia hold for Korea as an investment venue, do you think? For Korean businesses who are looking to invest in your country, what would be one tangible merit?
Well, there are more than one, actually. For instance, the healthcare sector. Medical devices is a sector where Korea is very, very powerful among countries in the world. I have to say that in that case, the nearshoring strategy works very well, very well. A quick example. As Korea has and Colombia has a free trade agreement, the parts that Korea needs in order, or that the company, a Korean company, needs to assemble a medical device, a medical appliance, may be sent to Colombia without any tariffs, and assembled in Colombia at a very cost competitive price, and then exported to United States, Mexico, Brazil, countries where Colombia also has free trade agreements, so it's going to enter to international markets without any tariffs. So that's a quick example. Other sectors could be, along with the medical devices, cosmetics, for instance, K-cosmetics, vehicles, electrical vehicles, and also electric transformators.
Right, I see. And before we wrap up today, Mr. O, Director O, that is, of course, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the pending tasks for the country in terms of ODA as the Yoon administration seeks a more global role, an expanded role in global affairs, that is.
Yeah, our ODA, so I think that, well, when I discussed with Korea's ODA with Ambassador Pelaez, he asked me whether a more speedy assistance is possible. In some cases, the existing 3-year support system could lower the effectiveness of our ODA. support. So therefore, this issue need to be or will be discussed in mid and long term. And also, we have to strengthen engagement with the citizens and people. One of doing so is gain support from domestic constituents by with regular information sharing. Also, the other way is to encourage private sector's investment in partner countries, and which would create jobs there. With this approach, we'll be able to realize Korea's vision of global pivotal nation.
And we'll keep our fingers crossed on that note then. Yeah. All right, Director, thank you so much for your thoughts. And Ambassador Pelaez, it's been a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you very much once again for your invitation.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's editions of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend and see you same time next Monday.
Hello, I'm Gustav Slamečka, Czech ambassador. Arirang TV is doing its best as a media diplomacy channel representing Korea by delivering current affairs information and news in a balanced voice. Everyone I meet can get news about Korea through Arirang, and we are thankful. I hope Arirang TV will continue to take the lead in delivering Korea's news to the world, and I hope it will be a channel for the world and Korea to synthesize. Resonating with the world, Arirang.